19-year-old Liana Adams stood trembling in the expansive marble lobby of Kade Holdings Tower, her worn flats leaving faint dusty prints across the polished floor. Her voice barely rose above a whisper as she looked up at the security guard who towered over her. "Please. I need help. I can't go back with my aunt. She plans to send me somewhere unsafe." It was Tuesday morning in downtown Riverton City, and the cool autumn breeze carried the scent of strong coffee and street-side pastries through the avenues lined with towering glass buildings. Professionals swept past in crisp suits, their shoes tapping sharply against the glossy floors, moving with the urgency of people whose lives had never collided with fear or desperation. In the middle of all that motion stood Liana, out of place, exhausted, and doing everything she could to keep her knees from giving out. Her jeans were faded at the seams, and the oversized sweater she wore swallowed her small frame. The canvas bag pressed to her chest contained everything she owned, a worn photograph of her parents, the last letter her mother wrote before passing, and a small carved angel her father had given her on her 10th birthday. She held it tightly now, grounding herself as memories of the last 24 hours clawed at her thoughts. If you are enjoying this story, please like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. The night before, her aunt had screamed that she was tired of feeding a burden she never asked for, and by sunrise she announced she had arranged for Liana to be taken to a facility far away. Liana had overheard enough cold whispers to know the place wasn't safe. Fear lit a fire in her chest, and before the woman could force her into the car, Liana slipped out the back door and ran. She went straight to the only neighbor she trusted and begged for guidance. "Who is the richest person in this city? Someone powerful. Someone who can stop her." The woman had pointed toward the skyline, where the tallest building gleamed like a blade catching sunlight. "That belongs to Arlan Kade," she said softly. "But child, men like him don't often intervene in matters like yours." But Liana was already running. Now she stood inside the tower, trembling but refusing to turn back. "Miss, you can't be here," the guard said. "Where is your family?" "I don't have one anymore," she replied, lifting her chin even as her voice cracked. "I won't leave until someone listens." A few guards exchanged amused glances. One laughed under his breath, and the sound drew the attention of receptionists and passing executives. Faces turned to look at her, some pitying, some annoyed, others indifferent. But Liana remained still, her fingers digging into her bag strap as she repeated silently to herself that she had already survived worse humiliation than this. On the mezzanine level, Jacob Rivera, a junior analyst carrying a stack of reports, heard the commotion rising from the lobby. Curious, he stepped into the elevator and descended. When the doors opened, he found a circle of guards around a frightened young woman struggling to keep her dignity intact. Something in the scene triggered an old, unwelcome memory, one that reminded him of a time when he too had needed someone to believe him. "What's going on here?" Jacob asked, walking closer. Before the guards could answer, Liana looked up at him with tired eyes that held more strength than she realized. She explained her story clearly and respectfully, the threats from her aunt, the danger waiting for her if she returned, and her desperate hope that Arlan Kade might listen because she had no one else left. She added, quietly, that she was willing to work, cleaning, organizing, assisting with errands, anything, to earn the right to be heard. Jacob lowered himself slightly so they were eye level, just as Marcus had done for Daniel in the original story. He asked her name, and she told him. He asked to see the contents of her bag, and she showed him the few items she had protected with her life. The crowd grew quiet. Jacob made his decision. "Come with me," he said gently. Ignoring the guard's confusion, he led Liana toward the private executive elevator. She clutched her bag tightly, stepping inside with hesitant steps. As the elevator doors slid shut and the ascent began, she finally whispered, "Is Mr. Kade frightening?" Jacob offered a small, reassuring smile. "He's strict, demanding, but he's also fair, and sometimes more human than people realize." The elevator chimed. The doors opened onto the executive floor. Liana held her breath. Whatever waited ahead would change her life. The elevator doors opened to the executive floor, where the air felt still and noticeably more refined than the bustling spaces below. Soft lighting glowed from recessed fixtures in the ceiling, and the floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a breathtaking view of Riverton City that made Liana briefly forget the fear twisting inside her stomach. Jacob guided her down a quiet hallway lined with glass partitions until they reached a pair of imposing wooden doors with a polished metal plate that read, Arlan Kade, Chief Executive Officer. He knocked twice. Enter, came a deep, controlled voice from inside. The office was enormous, larger than the living room, dining room, and bedroom of Liana's aunt's house combined. Sunlight washed over the polished floors and sleek furniture, and behind an impeccably organized desk sat Arlan Kade, the man she had desperately hoped to reach. He looked up with sharp, assessing eyes, his posture straight and disciplined, and his presence so commanding that Liana instinctively stood closer to Jacob. Jacob, Arlan said without looking away from the girl. I don't recall approving any walk-ins this morning. Jacob took a careful step forward. Sir, this young woman came to the lobby asking for your help. The situation seemed urgent, and I thought it best that you hear her out personally. Arlan finally leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Is that so? He directed his attention fully to Liana. Tell me your name. My name is Liana Adams, she said, keeping her voice steady. I'm 19 years old. And why have you come here? His tone was not cruel, just precise, as if he wanted the truth stripped of emotion. Liana explained everything, beginning with her parents' deaths and her forced move into her aunt's home. She described the progressive cruelty, the sudden decision to send her away, and her fear that the place she was being taken to was dangerous. Her hands shook slightly as she spoke, but she kept her voice even, determined not to appear unstable or dramatic. Arlan listened without interrupting, his expression remaining hard to read, though his eyes narrowed slightly at certain details, especially the mention of the facility her aunt had arranged. When Liana finished speaking, he glanced briefly at Jacob, then returned his attention to her. You came here to ask me for help, he said. Why me, specifically? Liana reached into her canvas bag and removed the worn photograph of her parents, placing it carefully on the edge of his desk. Because I was told you are the most powerful person in this city, she said quietly. And because I have no one else left to ask. I'm not here for charity. I'm willing to work, cleaning, organizing files, assisting with errands, anything that proves I'm not expecting something for nothing. I just need someone who can stop her before she forces me to go somewhere unsafe. Jacob looked at her with softened eyes, recognizing the steady resolve in her voice. Arlan, however, remained silent. He lifted the photograph, studied it briefly, then set it down with deliberate care. He stood and walked toward the tall windows, keeping his back to her as he considered everything she had said. You haven't eaten today, he said finally, not as a question but as an observation. No, sir, Liana admitted. Not since yesterday. Arlan nodded once, turned around, and faced her with a level of seriousness that made her spine straighten. You will not be returning to your aunt's home today, he said. I will look into this personally. Until then, you will remain under my protection. Jacob, arrange for her to eat and prepare a temporary room. Liana's breath caught in her throat. She lowered her head, overcome with quiet relief, and whispered, Thank you, sir. Arlan did not smile, but his silence carried a weight that felt like assurance. For the first time in years, Liana felt the faintest glimmer of safety. Jacob returned a few minutes later with a food tray, and Liana sat quietly at a small table near the office window as she ate. Her hands shook slightly as she held the sandwich, partly from hunger and partly from the lingering disbelief that someone as powerful as Arlan Kade had taken her seriously. Arlan remained at his desk, reviewing documents while keeping a discreet eye on her. Though he said little, the tension in his jaw revealed that her story had unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Once she finished eating, Arlan stood and announced that they were leaving the building. Liana froze for a moment, unsure whether she had misunderstood him, but Arlan clarified that he intended to assess her living situation personally before taking further action. Something in his tone made it clear this was not a suggestion but a decision he had already committed to. Jacob nodded, accustomed to Arlan's direct approach, and motioned for Liana to follow them. If you are enjoying this story, please like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. They descended to the private parking level, where a sleek black town car waited beside a row of reserved spaces. Liana hesitated before climbing inside, overwhelmed by the contrast between her life and the polished vehicle now carrying her through the city. The leather seats felt impossibly smooth beneath her fingers, and the quiet hum of the engine created a calm she had not felt in years. Arlan sat beside her, focused yet alert, while Jacob took the seat in front. The city passed in a blur outside the window, skyscrapers shifting to crowded streets, then to modest neighborhoods, and finally to the older district where Liana had lived with her aunt. As the car slowed, Liana's breath grew shallow. She recognized the chipped fence, the peeling paint on the windows, and the overgrown yard that had always felt like a warning more than a home. Her aunt's car was still in the driveway, confirming that the confrontation she had feared all morning was about to happen. Arlan stepped out first, his expression unreadable but steady, and signaled for Liana to stay close to him. The intensity in his posture made it clear that he had already taken her side in a way no one else ever had. Together, with Jacob standing slightly behind them, they approached the front door. Liana clutched her canvas bag tightly, her pulse racing, knowing that this moment would determine whether she finally stepped out of the life that had kept her trapped for years. Liana's aunt opened the front door abruptly, as if prepared to yell at whoever had knocked, but her expression froze the moment she saw Liana standing beside Arlan and Jacob. The hostility in her eyes momentarily flickered into uncertainty before she forced a strained smile that did nothing to hide the irritation tightening her face. She leaned against the doorway as if she intended to block entry and demanded to know why they were there. Arlan introduced himself calmly, explaining that he had come to verify Liana's claims about her living situation. The woman's fake smile wavered before she attempted to cover it with an overly sweet tone that did not match her rigid posture. She insisted that Liana was exaggerating, claiming her niece was ungrateful and prone to creating drama. Her voice grew sharper the longer she talked, and Liana lowered her gaze, feeling the familiar sting of shame even though nothing the woman said was true. Jacob watched her closely and noticed how she flinched whenever her aunt raised her voice, a reaction that hinted at deeper mistreatment. Arlan's expression remained unreadable, yet his silence seemed to pressure the aunt into continuing her defensive explanations, which grew less convincing with each sentence. When Arlan asked to enter the house, the woman hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea. After a tense pause, she stepped aside. The interior of the home revealed far more than her words had claimed. The living room was cluttered and dusty, with piles of laundry stacked in corners. Liana's belongings had been shoved into a cramped space near the hallway, indicating she had not been treated as part of the household, but as someone taking up unwanted space. A half-packed bag sat beside the door, confirming that the aunt had indeed prepared to send her away quickly. Arlan scanned the room quietly, his jaw tightening as he observed every detail. Her aunt continued to speak defensively, insisting she had done her best and had no legal obligation to keep supporting someone else's child. The bitterness in her voice sharpened as she gestured dismissively toward Liana. At that moment, Arlan's demeanor shifted. He stepped forward, though his tone remained controlled, and stated firmly that Liana would not be staying there any longer. He informed the woman that her attempt to dispose of a young adult without proper process was unacceptable, and he would be handling the matter from this point forward. The aunt sputtered, her face twisting with anger, but Arlan's presence and calm authority left her scrambling for words. Liana stood behind him, her heart pounding as she realized that for the first time in years, someone was not only listening to her, but standing up for her without hesitation. Arlan did not raise his voice or show anger, yet the authority in his tone made it clear the conversation was over. Liana's aunt stared at him, her expression flickering between outrage and uncertainty as she struggled to process the fact that someone far more powerful than she expected had stepped into the situation. Her mouth opened as if she intended to argue, but the words caught in her throat when Arlan calmly stated that any further attempt to intimidate or endanger Liana would be documented and addressed legally. The quiet firmness in his voice carried more weight than any threat could. Liana's breath trembled as she watched the exchange, and when Arlan gently but decisively told her to gather her things, she moved with careful urgency. Her things amounted to little more than a small pile of clothes and the few personal items she had kept in her canvas bag, and the realization that she owned so little made her chest tighten. Jacob helped her fold what she had, noticing the way she hesitated each time she looked at her aunt, as if her body still expected a reprimand for touching anything without permission. When Liana stepped back into the doorway, her aunt glared at her with cold resentment, but she no longer had the confidence to speak. Arlan offered a polite but unyielding nod before guiding Liana away from the house. The moment the gate closed behind them, Liana let out a breath she had been holding for years. It came out shaky, almost uncertain, as if she was not yet convinced she was free to exhale. The ride back to the city felt surreal. Liana sat in the back seat, gripping her bag tightly while the world outside the window shifted from broken fences and peeling paint to cafes, storefronts, and towering glass buildings that reflected the afternoon light. Arlan sat beside her, focused and composed, but she could feel the protective shift in his presence even though he said very little. Jacob occasionally glanced at her through the rearview mirror, offering a reassuring smile that grounded her as her mind raced through everything that had happened. When they reached the tower, Arlan instructed Jacob to escort her to a temporary guest suite within the building, somewhere secure, warm, and far removed from the chaos she had just escaped. Liana followed Jacob down a quiet hallway lined with soft lighting, each step feeling like a step away from the life she had been trapped in. The suite was modest but clean, with a small bed, a private bathroom, and a window overlooking the city. To Liana, it felt like another world entirely. As she stepped inside, Jacob told her that Mr. Kade would speak with her again soon, after reviewing the legal details regarding her aunt and ensuring her safety moving forward. Liana nodded, overwhelmed by the fact that someone she had met only hours earlier was now taking steps to protect her with a seriousness she had never known. When Jacob closed the door gently behind her, the room fell quiet, and for the first time in years, Liana felt a calm she had almost forgotten how to recognize. That evening, as the city lights flickered against the windows, she sat on the bed with her canvas bag beside her and allowed herself to believe, slowly, cautiously, that her life might finally be changing for the better. When Arlan returned to his office after leaving Liana in the guest suite, the atmosphere among the senior staff had already shifted. Word had spread that he had personally intervened in a situation involving a young woman who had arrived distressed in the lobby. Executives whispered near the elevators, analysts exchanged quiet glances, and assistants who normally scurried past him without pausing found excuses to stand near the hallway, hoping to hear more. It had been years since anyone had seen Arlan take a personal interest in anything outside the rigid boundaries of business. Arlan ignored the murmurs and stepped into his office, closing the door behind him. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the city stretching out beyond the glass. He was not a man who acted impulsively, which made his own reaction to Liana's situation difficult to dismiss. Something about her steady composure despite fear, her willingness to work rather than beg, and the quiet dignity with which she shared her story had pierced a part of him he usually kept sealed. He loosened his tie slightly, an unconscious gesture he almost never made during working hours. Jacob entered a few minutes later with a folder containing the initial report on Liana's aunt and the facility she had mentioned. Even a brief review revealed disturbing inconsistencies, financial irregularities, prior complaints, and several mentions of individuals who had gone in but never been accounted for afterward. Arlan's expression darkened as he read through the notes. He tapped his fingers once against the desk, a sign Jacob recognized as the moment Arlan shifted from observation into decisive action. "We need a full investigation," Arlan said. "Discreet, but thorough. I want to know everything about this place and everyone connected to it." Jacob nodded, already making mental notes. "And about her aunt?" Arlan exhaled slowly. Her intentions were clear from the moment she answered the door. "I want legal to review whether she attempted to abandon or traffic a dependent under the guise of guardianship. No assumptions. Just facts." Jacob agreed and left to assign the tasks. As soon as the door closed, Arlan sat back in his chair, but instead of feeling settled, he felt a weight in his chest that he could not ignore. For years he had built an empire with precision, discipline, and distance. Yet that distance had dissolved the moment Liana explained her situation in his office. He replayed her words, her trembling but determined posture, and the way she clutched her canvas bag like it contained the last pieces of her identity. He checked the time, then stood abruptly. The investigation would take several hours, but there was something he needed to do before reviewing the results. He told his assistant to arrange for security clearance so he could access the guest suite area, and then he left his office without explaining why. As he walked down the quiet hallway toward the residential wing of the building, he realized he was doing something he had not done in years, choosing to care before he had all the facts. And for reasons he could not fully articulate, he knew this choice mattered. The hallway leading to the guest suites was quiet, softened by warm lighting that contrasted sharply with the cool, businesslike atmosphere of the upper floors. Arlan walked at a steady pace, his expression controlled but his mind replaying every detail of the morning. He was not accustomed to letting personal concern influence his decisions, yet something about Liana's quiet resilience had unsettled him in a way he had not expected. He paused outside the door to her suite, lifted his hand, and knocked lightly. Inside, Liana had been sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the small collection of belongings she had unpacked onto the nightstand. She stood quickly when she heard the knock, unsure whether she should feel nervous or relieved. When she opened the door and saw Arlan standing there, she instinctively straightened her posture, trying to look composed even though exhaustion still clung to her features. "I wanted to check on you," Arlan said, stepping into the room with the calm assurance that always accompanied him. "Jacob informed me that you settled in. Is everything adequate?" Liana nodded, her fingers brushing the strap of her canvas bag. "Yes, sir. Thank you. I'm not used to anything like this. It's a lot, but I'm grateful." Arlan observed her for a moment, noticing the subtle way her shoulders relaxed only after she spoke. "You're safe here," he said. "Nothing will happen to you while you're under my protection. I intend to resolve this situation properly." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. She lowered her eyes briefly, overwhelmed by a feeling she had not experienced in years: security. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "I didn't expect anyone to believe me." Arlan studied her expression, seeing the lingering fear beneath her composure. "Belief isn't the issue," he replied. "Truth is. And your truth is clear." He stepped back toward the door, giving her space. "Rest for now. There's more we need to discuss, but only when you're ready." When he left the room, closing the door gently behind him, Liana sat back on the bed with a slow breath. For the first time in a long time, she felt the faint burn of hope, not a fragile flicker, but the beginning of something steady. Liana slept lightly throughout the afternoon, waking every so often as unfamiliar city sounds echoed through the window. The quiet hum of air conditioning, the distant traffic, and the soft glow of evening light felt foreign to her, yet comforting in a way she could not fully describe. By the time Jacob returned with dinner, she had gathered enough strength to sit at the small table in the corner of the room. He placed the tray in front of her and took a seat across from her, trying to put her at ease with gentle conversation. He avoided heavy topics at first, asking if she was settling in or needed anything. Gradually, as he noticed her shoulders loosening and her voice becoming steadier, he shifted into deeper questions about her aunt, her parents, and her life before everything fell apart. Liana answered slowly and thoughtfully, choosing her words with care. She explained that her parents had been kind, hard-working people who valued education and compassion, and that losing them at 16 had shattered the sense of stability she had always known. She described the months that followed, filled with relatives who did not want responsibility and decisions made about her life without her consent, until her aunt agreed to take her in. Jacob listened without interrupting, recognizing that Liana needed space to speak in her own rhythm. She told him about the house, the coldness that settled into the walls over the years, and the feeling of being tolerated rather than welcomed. She avoided describing the worst moments, but Jacob could see glimpses of them in her eyes. Nights spent awake in fear, days when she did not eat, and the constant awareness that she could be discarded at any moment. Her voice softened when she spoke of the small things that helped her survive: her mother's letter, the carved angel, and the fleeting memories that reminded her she once belonged somewhere safe. When Liana finally paused, Jacob leaned forward slightly. "You know," he said, "Mr. Kade doesn't get involved in personal matters often. But when he does, it's for a reason. He doesn't take these things lightly." Liana looked down at her hands, unsure how to respond. "I still don't understand why he believes me," she whispered. "Most people don't." "Because you're telling the truth," Jacob replied simply. "And because he knows what it looks like when someone is fighting alone." Before leaving, Jacob told her that Arlan planned to meet with her again in the morning after reviewing the legal information. Liana nodded, feeling both nervous and grateful. When the door closed and she was alone again, she sat for a long moment in silence, realizing how unusual it felt to speak to someone who genuinely wanted to understand her story. It was the first time in years that she had been allowed to share pieces of herself without fear of punishment, and in that quiet moment, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: the beginning of trust. Arlan barely slept that night. He remained in his office long after most of the building had emptied, reviewing documents, making calls, and speaking with his legal and private investigation teams. Each new piece of information about the facility Liana's aunt had planned to send her to painted a darker picture than the last. There were financial inconsistencies, missing reports, and several mentions of young women who had been transferred without ever being accounted for again. Arlan felt his jaw tighten as he read through every page, The more he learned, the clearer it became that Liana had been in real danger. By morning, the full report sat on his desk, thick enough to reveal the seriousness of the situation. When Jacob entered, Arlan was already standing by the window, his arms folded, his posture tense in a way Jacob had not seen in years. Jacob placed a fresh cup of coffee on the desk and waited, understanding that Arlan never rushed his thoughts when he was in this state. "She wasn't lying," Arlan said finally, his voice low but sharpened by anger. "Her aunt wasn't just trying to get rid of her. She was sending her into something criminal." Jacob nodded. The investigators confirmed it. People have complained before. Some were ignored, others were silenced. "It's worse than we expected." Arlan turned away from the window, his expression darkening with controlled fury. "Make sure the authorities receive this entire report. I want the place shut down. And I want charges filed against anyone involved, including her aunt." Jacob agreed, already pulling out his phone to begin coordinating the next steps. But Arlan wasn't finished. He moved back to his desk, leaning forward with both hands pressed against the polished surface. "Today," he said quietly, "Liana needs to hear the truth. She deserves to know she wasn't imagining anything. And she needs to understand that she's no longer alone in this." Jacob hesitated for a moment. "How do you want to approach it?" Arlan straightened, his decision already clear. "I'll speak to her myself." A few minutes later, Arlan left his office with the report in hand, heading toward the residential wing. The building buzzed with its usual morning activity, employees stepping aside when they saw him approach, unaware that for the first time in a long while, his urgency wasn't about business. As he walked through the quiet hallway toward Liana's suite, his grip tightened around the file. He knew the conversation ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would change Liana's life, because it confirmed that her fears had been real and that she had escaped something far more dangerous than she ever realized. Liana was sitting at the small table inside her suite, brushing the last crumbs of breakfast from her fingers, when she heard a soft knock. She stood quickly, smoothing her sweater before opening the door. Arlan stood on the other side, holding a thick file that made her stomach clench. His expression was calm, but there was a heaviness in his eyes she had not seen before. "May I come in?" he asked. She stepped aside. Arlan entered and placed the file on the table, gesturing for her to sit. Liana lowered herself cautiously onto the chair, her pulse quickening as he opened the report. Arlan began with the facts, clear, measured, and without exaggeration. The facility her aunt wanted to send her to was involved in criminal activity, including exploitation and unrecorded transfers of young women. Complaints had been buried, inspections avoided, and families misled. Her aunt had been in contact with them for months. Liana listened in silence, her hands slowly tightening around the fabric of her jeans. With each detail Arlan shared, her breath grew shallower until she finally pressed a trembling hand over her mouth. She had feared her aunt disliked her. She had never imagined she had been in real danger. Tears spilled before she could stop them. "All this time, she really wanted to get rid of me," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the truth. Arlan sat across from her, his tone firm but gentle. "What happened to you was wrong. None of this is your fault. And I won't allow anyone to harm you again." His certainty steadied her. For the first time, Liana understood that she was not merely being rescued, she was being believed. Liana wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, embarrassed by how easily the tears had come, but the weight of everything she'd just learned pressed too heavily on her chest to hold back. Arlan closed the file gently and pushed it aside, giving her a moment to breathe. His presence remained steady, firm, but without the sharpness she had seen when he confronted her aunt. Here, he was different. He waited patiently, allowing her silence to settle without rushing her. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't understand why she hated me so much. I tried so hard to be useful." Arlan shook his head, his tone calm but resolute. "Cruelty doesn't need a reason, Liana. And you were never the problem." His words carried a certainty she had never heard from anyone in her life, and it left her chest tight with a mixture of relief and disbelief. He stood, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt as if preparing for a decision already made. "You can't remain in the guest suite permanently. It's too exposed. I've arranged for you to stay in one of the residential apartments connected to the building. Security will monitor the area, and only authorized personnel can enter. Liana stared at him, startled. I don't deserve all this. You deserve safety, Arlan replied simply. And until this situation is fully resolved, you'll have it. Jacob arrived moments later with a small access card and luggage cart. Liana gathered her few belongings, still overwhelmed by how quickly her world had shifted. As they walked through the quiet private corridor toward her new apartment, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, a cautious, trembling sense of belonging. Not because she owned the space, but because someone had finally decided she was worth protecting. The apartment Jacob led her to was nothing like the cold, cluttered room she had lived in for years. It was small but warm, with soft lighting, a neatly made bed, and a window that overlooked the city skyline. Liana stood in the doorway for a long moment, her canvas bag pressed to her chest, unable to believe the space was meant for her. The air smelled of fresh linen and quiet comfort, and she felt a strange ache building behind her eyes, a mix of relief and disbelief she couldn't put into words. Jacob placed the access card on the counter and showed her how to lock the door from inside. "This area is heavily monitored," he said gently. "Only security and Mr. Kade have clearance. No one else can reach you here." Liana nodded, her voice too tight to speak. She walked slowly through the room, brushing her fingers over the soft blanket, the small desk, the clean bathroom. Every detail felt unreal. She placed her mother's letter and the carved angel on the bedside table, grounding herself in the tiny remnants of her past. Not long after Jacob left, a soft knock sounded at the door. When Liana opened it, Arlan stood there, hands in his pockets, his expression composed yet unusually gentle. "I wanted to make sure everything is suitable," he said. "It's more than I ever imagined," she replied, her voice shaking. "Thank you." Arlan studied her face carefully. "You're safe now, Liana. And you'll remain safe. I'll handle everything from here." Her throat tightened. No one had ever spoken to her with that level of certainty before. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe him. When evening settled over the city, the apartment grew softly illuminated by the warm glow from the bedside lamp. Liana sat on the edge of her new bed, her hands folded in her lap, trying to understand the strange sensation sitting heavy in her chest. It wasn't fear, nor was it sadness. It was something gentler, something she had not allowed herself to feel in years. Safety. For the first time, she could breathe without waiting for someone to call her name with anger. She looked around the apartment again, taking in the smooth curtains, the clean floor, the small kitchenette stocked with basics Jacob had brought earlier. Nothing extravagant, yet every detail felt intentional, as if someone had actually thought about her comfort. She touched the carved angel on her nightstand and whispered a quiet hope that her parents could somehow see her now. A soft chime vibrated from the apartment intercom. When she answered, Arlan's voice came through. "Just checking in. How are you feeling?" Liana hesitated before replying. "Better than I thought I could, sir." "Good," he said. "I'll finalize the legal steps tomorrow. Once everything is processed, your aunt will no longer have any claim over you. After that, we focus on rebuilding. One step at a time." His calm confidence steadied her heartbeat. She thanked him quietly, and after he ended the call, she stood by the window overlooking the city lights. The streets glowed with movement far below. Cars, people, bright signs she had never taken the time to notice before. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a shadow trapped inside someone else's home. She felt like a person standing at the beginning of a new life. And for the first time, she began to believe she deserved it. The next morning, sunlight poured softly through the curtains, warming the small apartment in a way Liana had never experienced before. She woke slowly, almost startled by how rested she felt. There had been no yelling, no sudden footsteps in the hallway, no anxious waiting for something to go wrong. For a moment, she simply lay there, breathing in the quiet. A gentle knock sounded on the door. When she opened it, Jacob stood with a polite smile. "Mr. Kade asked me to bring you to his office when you're ready," he said. "He has updates." Liana changed quickly and followed him through the private corridor, her steps light but nervous. When she entered Arlan's office, he was already reviewing documents, but he set them aside the moment he saw her. His expression was composed, but there was a subtle warmth in his eyes that made her feel less intimidated. "I've spoken to the authorities," he began. Your aunt will be questioned today. The facility is under investigation, and operations have been suspended. You won't have to worry about either of them again." Liana let out a shaky breath she didn't realize she was holding. "Thank you, sir. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't need to," he replied. "But I want to give you structure, a chance to build something new. If you're willing, Jacob can teach you basic administrative tasks. It isn't formal employment yet, but it's a start." Her eyes widened. "You'd let me help here?" "You're capable," Arlan said simply. "And it's time someone gave you room to prove it." For the first time, Liana felt a spark of purpose, something beyond survival. Liana spent the rest of the morning in a small conference room just down the hall from Arlan's office. Jacob sat beside her, patiently showing her how to sort digital files, enter basic data, and organize schedules. At first, her fingers hovered awkwardly over the keyboard, hesitant and unsure, but Jacob's calm voice guided her through each step. He never rushed her or made her feel foolish. Instead, he explained things twice if needed and always offered a quiet reassurance that she was doing well. Liana absorbed every instruction with determined focus. For years, she had been made to feel incapable, as if her only value was in staying quiet and out of the way. Now, someone was trusting her with real responsibilities, and the weight of that trust strengthened her resolve. She wanted to prove she was more than a burden. She wanted to prove she belonged somewhere. From his office, Arlan occasionally glanced through the glass partition that separated them. He watched as Liana leaned closer to the screen, her brows furrowed in concentration, her posture straightening each time she mastered a step. There was something quietly admirable about the way she approached each task, with humility, patience, and a seriousness far beyond her years. More than once, Jacob caught Arlan observing and gave a small, knowing smile. By lunchtime, Liana had completed several assignments, each one neatly organized and double-checked. Jacob reviewed her work carefully, then nodded with approval. "You're picking this up faster than most interns," he said. Liana felt her cheeks warm. No one had ever praised her like that. "Thank you. I want to learn. I really do." And she meant it. For the first time in her life, she felt capable, like she could build something new from the ruins she left behind. By the following day, Liana had already settled into a quiet routine: breakfast in her apartment, a walk through the private corridor, then hours of training with Jacob. She moved with a little more confidence than before, her steps steadier, her shoulders no longer pulled tight with fear. But as she walked through the main hallway outside the conference room, she couldn't ignore the shift in the atmosphere around her. Two assistants paused mid-conversation when she passed. Another woman nudged her colleague subtly, whispering behind her hand. A pair of analysts glanced over their shoulders, their expressions curious, confused, and, some, slightly judgmental. Liana felt the heat rise in her cheeks. She lowered her eyes, clutching her notebook tighter as she slipped into the room where Jacob was waiting. He noticed her tense expression immediately. "Ignore them," he said gently. "People here love to gossip about anything they don't understand. It'll pass." "I didn't mean to cause trouble," Liana murmured. "I don't want Mr. Kade to have problems because of me." Jacob shook his head. "You're not causing anything. You didn't choose what happened to you. And you're not doing anything wrong now." What neither of them realized was that Arlan had overheard part of the hallway whispering earlier. He had paused near the corner, hands in his pockets, silently watching the employees who stared at Liana with too much curiosity. His expression had cooled, and later in the day, he quietly instructed department heads to remind their teams about professionalism and discretion. When Liana returned to her tasks, she tried to focus on the work in front of her. And despite the whispers outside, she felt something new growing inside her, an anchor of stability she didn't want to lose. By the end of the week, Liana had completed several small administrative tasks on her own. Jacob reviewed everything carefully, and each time he handed her work back, his comments were consistent, neat, accurate, and improving quickly. Liana felt a quiet pride building each time he nodded in approval. It wasn't loud or overwhelming, but it warmed something inside her that had been cold for years. That afternoon, Arlan stepped into the conference room unexpectedly. Jacob straightened, surprised, while Liana rose to her feet quickly, her fingers tightening around the notebook she had been using. She never knew how to act when Arlan appeared without warning. His presence still carried a weight she wasn't used to. What are you working on? Arlan asked. Jacob handed him the folder containing her completed tasks. Arlan flipped through each page slowly, his expression unreadable. Liana held her breath, afraid of disappointing him. After a moment, he closed the folder and looked at her directly. You're adapting faster than most new trainees, he said. The simple sentence made her heart jump. Thank you, sir. I'm trying my best. I can see that. Arlan's tone softened a fraction. Keep going. Effort matters more than experience. Liana nodded, trying not to let her smile show too much. When Arlan left the room, Jacob gave her an approving look. He doesn't praise people easily, Jacob said. He meant that. Hours later, when she walked back to her apartment, Liana felt lighter than she had all week. Not because she wanted to impress Arlan, but because, for the first time, she felt like she genuinely could. Like her life was finally moving forward in a direction she chose. 2 days later, Jacob arrived at Liana's apartment earlier than usual, a faint smile already forming on his face. Mr. Kade needs to see you, he said gently. It's good news. Liana's heart picked up speed as she followed him through the quiet corridor, her hands nervously clasped together. When she entered Arlan's office, he was standing beside his desk, a set of documents neatly arranged in front of him. His expression was composed, but there was a softened edge to his posture she hadn't seen before. It's done, Arlan said simply. Your aunt has been questioned and formally charged. The facility has been shut down, and every person connected to it is under investigation. You are legally free. She has no authority over you anymore. The words hit her so hard she had to grip the back of the chair to steady herself. I don't know what to say, she whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. I never thought this day would come. Arlan stepped closer, his tone steady and reassuring. You survived something no one your age should have faced. And you did it with strength. Now you get to decide the life you want. Liana let out a shaky breath, overwhelmed by relief and gratitude. Thank you, sir. For believing me. For everything. He gave a small nod. This isn't charity, Liana. You earned your safety. And whatever you choose next, you won't be doing it alone. As she walked out of his office into the warm glow of the hallway, Liana felt something she had never allowed herself to feel before. Freedom. Real, undeniable freedom. Her new life had finally begun. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in this person's place? I'd really love to hear your opinion. Big hugs, and see you next time.